For 18 months, Staff Sergeant David Coleman had refused to speak in his own defense. He sat silent as prosecutors called him a deserter, a coward, a disgrace to the uniform. The jury found him guilty in 3 hours. What they couldn't understand was why he chose prison over revealing the truth that would save him. Welcome to the Hidden Stories, where we explore the incredible tales of ordinary people living extraordinary lives hidden in plain sight. Before we dive into today's story, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and if you've ever discovered someone was completely different from who you thought they were. The federal courthouse in Norfolk, Virginia stands like a monument to justice, its imposing columns and marble steps speaking to the weight of decisions made within its walls. On this gray October morning, protesters gather outside, their signs reading "Traitor" and "Coward" in bold red letters. They've come to witness the sentencing of Staff Sergeant David Coleman, the soldier who allegedly abandoned his post during the bloodiest firefight in Afghanistan since 2010. Inside Courtroom 4B, every seat is occupied. Military families fill the gallery, some supporting Coleman, others demanding justice for what they believe was an act of cowardice that cost American lives. The media section buzzes with reporters from CNN, Fox News, and military publications, all eager to capture the final chapter of what has become known as the Ghost Valley Incident. At the defendant's table sits Coleman himself, 28 years old, with the lean build of an infantryman and eyes that seemed to carry more weight than any 28-year-old should bear. His military dress uniform is immaculate, ribbons and medals speaking to 5 years of exemplary service before that night in Afghanistan changed everything. Yet today, those decorations feel like accusations rather than honors. His court-appointed attorney, Captain Sarah Mitchell, frantically shuffles through papers one final time. For months, she has begged Coleman to let her present a defense, to call witnesses, to reveal what really happened in Ghost Valley. Each time, he has refused with the same words: "Some things are bigger than one man's reputation." Judge Colonel Patricia Brennan enters, her silver hair pulled back severely, her expression grave. 25 years on the bench have shown her every type of military case imaginable, but Coleman's silence throughout the proceedings has puzzled her. In her experience, innocent men fight. Guilty men make excuses. Silent men usually have secrets worth keeping. Staff Sergeant Coleman, please rise for sentencing. Judge Brennan commands. Coleman stands with the perfect posture drilled into him at Fort Benning, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. In the gallery, his mother Sarah Coleman clutches a tissue, her face streaked with tears. She has traveled from their small hometown in Montana, where David was once the high school quarterback who gave up a football scholarship to serve his country after 9/11. Prosecutor Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison approaches the bench, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in military law. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. On the night of March 15, 2023, during a coordinated Taliban assault on Forward Operating Base Reaper, Staff Sergeant Coleman abandoned his defensive position, leaving a critical gap in our perimeter that resulted in enemy forces breaching our compound. Morrison turns to face Coleman directly. 8 soldiers were wounded that night. 3 remain in permanent care facilities. All because the defendant chose to run when his brothers needed him most. The prosecutor's voice rises with emotion. This court has heard testimony from surviving members of Coleman's unit. They all confirm the same devastating truth. When the enemy attacked, Coleman vanished into the darkness. The courtroom is silent except for muffled sobs from the gallery. Among the observers, retired Master Sergeant Thomas Wright shifts uncomfortably in his seat. Wright, who served 3 tours in Afghanistan, has driven 12 hours from North Carolina to witness this sentencing. Something about the case has bothered him for months, though he can't articulate exactly what. Judge Brennan reviews her notes one final time. The evidence, while circumstantial, in some areas, paints a clear picture of desertion under fire. Coleman's own refusal to testify or provide any explanation for his absence during the battle has left little room for doubt. Yet something in the young sergeant's demeanor suggests depths to this story that remain unexplored. Staff Sergeant Coleman, Judge Brennan begins. You have been found guilty of desertion in the face of the enemy, a charge that carries with it not just legal consequences, but a betrayal of every soldier who has ever worn the uniform with honor. Do you have anything to say before I pronounce sentence? Coleman stands motionless for a long moment, his jaw working silently as if he's wrestling with words that want to be spoken, but cannot. Finally, he speaks in a voice barely above a whisper. I served my country to the best of my ability, Your Honor. I have no regrets about my actions that night. The answer sends a ripple of anger through the gallery. Several military family members stand and begin walking toward the exits in disgust. To them, Coleman's words sound like defiance rather than remorse, arrogance rather than accountability. Morrison shakes his head in visible frustration. Even now, Your Honor, the defendant shows no remorse, no acknowledgement of the harm his cowardice caused. I respectfully request the maximum sentence allowable under military law. Judge Brennan prepares to speak when a commotion erupts at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swing open with enough force to bang against the walls, and the bailiff's hand instinctively moves toward his weapon before he recognizes the figures entering. A Marine colonel in full dress uniform strides down the center aisle, flanked by two junior officers carrying sealed document cases. Behind them, a Navy captain and an Air Force major follow in formation. But it's the group entering after the officers that causes every head in the courtroom to turn. 12 soldiers in dress uniform, their bearing unmistakably that of Special Operations Forces. The lead soldier, a tall man with sergeant major stripes and a chest full of ribbons that speak to decades of combat service, scans the courtroom with eyes that have seen too much. His gaze settles on Coleman, and for the first time since the trial began, Coleman's rigid composure cracks slightly. A look of recognition, and perhaps relief, passes between the two men. Judge Brennan bangs her gavel repeatedly. This is highly irregular. Bailiff, what is the meaning of this interruption? The Marine colonel approaches the bench, removing a document from his breast pocket. Your Honor, Colonel Marcus Rivera, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we have urgent business regarding Staff Sergeant Coleman's case. Morrison stands immediately. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. The defendant has been found guilty by a jury of his peers. Whatever these officers think they're doing, it cannot supersede the judicial process. Colonel Rivera's expression remains professional but firm. Sir, with respect, I believe it can and it will. Your Honor, I request an immediate conference in chambers. What? I'm about to present is classified at the highest levels and cannot be discussed in open court. The courtroom buzzes with confused whispers. Judge Brennan looks from Rivera to Coleman, noting that the defendant's face has gone pale but shows no surprise at this development. Staff Sergeant Coleman, did you know these officers were coming? Coleman's voice is steady when he replies, No, Your Honor, but I hoped they would. Judge Brennan calls for a 30-minute recess and orders all attorneys to her chambers. As the court clears, the 12 soldiers in dress uniform remain standing at attention in the gallery, their presence both protective and ominous. Coleman, still at the defendant's table, finally allows his shoulders to sag slightly as if a tremendous weight is beginning to lift. In the hallway, reporters scramble to identify the mysterious officers and soldiers. Retired Master Sergeant Wright approaches one of the younger soldiers, recognizing the distinctive Insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Son, Wright says quietly, I served with the Rangers in Iraq. What's this about? The young soldier's response is respectful but firm. I can't say much, Master Sergeant, but Staff Sergeant Coleman is the best soldier I've ever served with. What happened in Afghanistan, ... The truth isn't what people think. Meanwhile, in Judge Brennan's chambers, Colonel Rivera opens his document case and spreads classified files across the conference table. Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Colonel Morrison leaned forward, reading quickly, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock to something approaching awe. Your Honor, Rivera begins, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the level typically reserved for special access programs. Staff Sergeant Coleman was not at Forward Operating Base Reaper that night as part of normal infantry operations. He was there conducting a classified mission under the authority of Joint Special Operations. Command, Morrison interrupts, that's impossible. I've reviewed every classified document related to operations in that sector. There's no record of any special mission. Rivera slides another document across the table. Sir, Coleman's mission was so sensitive that it was compartmentalized even from theater command. On the night of March 15th, intelligence assets identified a high-value target moving through Ghost Valley. This individual was responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed over 200 coalition forces in the previous 6 months. Judge Brennan studies the documents carefully. Her security clearance from her time as a JAG officer allows her to understand the significance of what she's reading. Colonel Rivera, are you telling me that Staff Sergeant Coleman was conducting a solo mission to eliminate this target? Not eliminate, Your Honor. Capture. The intelligence value of this individual alive was deemed critical to ongoing operations throughout the region. Coleman was selected for this mission because of his unique qualifications: fluent Pashto, extensive experience in solo reconnaissance, and a psychological profile that indicated he could operate independently under extreme pressure. Captain Mitchell looks up from the documents. This says Coleman successfully captured the target and transported him to a classified location 23 kilometers from the base. The entire operation took place during the Taliban assault on the Fay B. Rivera nods. Coleman had a choice that night. He could maintain his defensive position and likely prevent the base from being overrun, or he could complete a mission that would save hundreds of lives over the following months. He chose the mission. Morrison's voice is barely controlled. You're telling me that Coleman allowed his own unit to be overrun while he was off playing special operator? Sir, Rivera's tone becomes sharp. I'm telling you that Coleman completed one of the most successful counterterrorism operations in the history of the Afghan conflict. The intelligence gathered from his prisoner led to the disruption of 17 planned attacks and the capture or elimination of 43 high-value targets. Conservatively, his actions that night saved over 500 coalition and civilian lives. Judge Brennan sets down the documents. Why wasn't this revealed during the trial? Your Honor, Coleman's mission was so compartmentalized that even I only learned the full details last week. When we realized he was facing court-martial rather than receiving a medal, we initiated an emergency review. What we found required immediate intervention. Morrison stands and begins pacing. This is insane. You're asking me to believe that. This soldier, this staff sergeant, was trusted with a mission of this magnitude without any of his superiors knowing? Rivera's expression hardens. Sir, Coleman volunteered for a program that most special operations forces consider too dangerous. For the past 2 years, he has conducted 17 solo missions behind enemy lines. His psychological evaluations indicate an almost pathological commitment to the mission, even at the cost of personal relationships, career advancement, and apparently personal reputation. Captain Mitchell looks through more documents. Your Honor, There are commendation letters here from generals I've never heard of, recommendations for decorations that were apparently never processed, and mission reports that read like something from a movie. The decorations were never processed because acknowledging them would compromise ongoing operations, Rivera explains. Coleman has been operating under such deep cover that even his own unit commanders aren't aware of his real assignment. Judge Brennan stands and walks to her window, looking out at the protesters still gathered on the courthouse steps. Colonel Rivera, you're asking me to overturn a jury verdict based on classified information that couldn't be presented during trial. The legal precedent here is, Your Honor, Rivera interrupts. With respect, the legal precedent is irrelevant compared to the injustice about to be committed. Staff Sergeant Coleman is not a deserter. He's one of the most decorated soldiers in the United States Army, and his decorations are classified at levels that prevent them from being acknowledged publicly. Morrison turns to Rivera. If this is all true, why didn't Coleman say something? Why did he sit silent and let himself be convicted? Rivera's expression softens slightly. Because that's what these soldiers do, sir. They take impossible missions that no one else will take, and they complete them knowing that no one will ever know what they've done. Coleman would rather go to prison than compromise operations that might save other soldiers' lives. Judge Brennan returns to her desk. I need to see Coleman privately. Bring him in here. 10 minutes later, Coleman enters the chambers, still in his dress uniform, still maintaining military bearing despite everything. Judge Brennan dismisses the attorneys, leaving only herself, Rivera, and Coleman in the room. Sergeant Coleman, Judge Brennan begins, I've reviewed the classified documents regarding your activities in Afghanistan. Is everything Colonel Rivera has told me accurate? Coleman's response is immediate and firm. Your Honor, I cannot confirm or deny classified operations. Rivera sighs. Coleman, the operation is declassified as of this morning. You can speak freely. For the first time in months, Coleman's rigid posture relaxes slightly. Your Honor, everything Colonel Rivera has told you is accurate. On the night of March 15th, I was conducting a classified mission to capture Rashid Hakim, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks throughout eastern Afghanistan. Judge Brennan studies his face. And you completed this mission successfully? Yes. Your Honor, Hakim was delivered to interrogation specialists at a classified location. The intelligence he provided led to significant tactical advantages in subsequent operations. Sergeant Coleman, why didn't you reveal this during your trial? Coleman's jaw tightens. Your Honor, soldiers in my unit were wounded that night. Men I'd served with, men who trusted me to be there when they needed me. From their perspective, I abandoned them. No classified mission, no matter how successful, changes the fact that I wasn't there to help my brothers when they were bleeding. Rivera steps forward. Your Honor, Coleman's psychological evaluation notes an unusual degree of what the examiner called survivor guilt coupled with mission-first mentality. He blames himself for every casualty that occurred while he was completing his assigned mission. Judge Brennan looks directly at Coleman. Do you believe you made the wrong choice that night? Coleman considers the question for a long moment. Your Honor, I made the choice I was trained to make. Mission first, soldiers. Always, self never. If faced with the same situation again, I would make the same decision. But that doesn't mean I don't carry the weight of what happened to my unit that night. Rivera pulls out another document. Your Honor, there's something else. The 3 soldiers who were most severely wounded that night have written letters requesting clemency for Coleman. They learned about his mission last week when they were finally cleared to receive the classified briefing. Judge Brennan reads the letters quickly, her expression softening. These men say they forgive Coleman and want him reinstated to active duty. Your Honor, Coleman says quietly. Those men shouldn't have to forgive me for doing my job. They were wounded because I wasn't there to do theirs. Rivera shakes his head. Coleman, you're the most decorated soldier in your unit. You've received 2 silver stars, a bronze star with V device, and a Purple Heart, all classified. You've completed missions that most Special Operations Forces consider impossible. Yet you focus on the one night when you couldn't be in 2 places at once. Judge Brennan makes her decision. We're returning to the courtroom. I'm going to do something I've never done in 25 years on the bench. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere is electric with tension. The 12 soldiers still stand at attention in the gallery, now joined by what appears to be a full colonel and a brigadier general who have arrived during the recess. The protesters outside have grown larger and more vocal, but inside the courtroom, an expectant silence has fallen. Judge Brennan takes the bench and surveys the packed gallery. Her eyes settle briefly on Coleman's mother, whose tear-streaked face shows a mixture of hope and desperation. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Brennan begins. In my 25 years as a military judge, I have never seen a case quite like this. 1. The jury rendered their verdict based on the evidence presented to them, evidence that painted Staff Sergeant Coleman as a deserter who abandoned his post during combat. The gallery stirs restlessly, confusion evident on many faces. However, Judge Brennan continues, information has come to light that fundamentally changes our understanding of the events of March 15th, 2023. Colonel Rivera, please approach the bench. Rivera stands and addresses the court. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to read a statement from the Department of Defense regarding Staff Sergeant Coleman's service record. Proceed, Colonel. Rivera removes a document from his uniform jacket. On the night of March 15th, 2023, Staff Sergeant David Coleman was not absent without leave from Forward Operating Base Ripper. He was conducting a classified mission under the direct authority of the Joint Special Operations Command. This mission, which has now been declassified, resulted in the capture of a high-value target whose intelligence led to the disruption of multiple planned attacks against coalition forces. A murmur runs through the gallery, but Rivera continues. Furthermore, Staff Sergeant Coleman's service record, which has been classified until today, shows that he is the recipient of numerous decorations for valor, including 2 silver stars for gallantry in action. His actions in Afghanistan have directly resulted in the saving of hundreds of American and Allied lives. Morrison stands, his face flushed. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The jury has already rendered their verdict based on the evidence presented during trial. Judge Brennan nods. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, you are correct that this is irregular. However, the evidence presented to the jury was incomplete due to national security classifications. Staff Sergeant Coleman had the opportunity to reveal this information in his own defense and chose not to, preferring to face conviction rather than compromise ongoing operations. She turns to face Coleman directly. Staff Sergeant Coleman, please. Rise. Coleman stands, and for the first time since the trial began, his bearing is that of a soldier rather than a defendant. Staff Sergeant Coleman, based on the newly declassified information regarding your actions on March 15th, 2023, and your exemplary service record, I am setting aside the jury's verdict. All charges against you are dismissed. The courtroom erupts. Coleman's mother collapses into her seat, sobbing with relief. The 12 soldiers in the gallery snap to attention and render a perfect salute to their comrade. Even some of the military family members who had earlier walked out in disgust are now standing and applauding Doc, but Judge Brennan is not finished. Furthermore, she continues, raising her voice over the commotion, I am ordering that Staff Sergeant Coleman's full service record be reviewed for appropriate decorations that may have been withheld due to classification issues. The Army owes This soldier not just an apology, but recognition for service that has gone far beyond the call of duty. As the judge's words sink in, the 12 soldiers in the gallery begin a slow, rhythmic clapping that builds into thunderous applause. They are joined by court officers, attorneys, and even some reporters. The sound echoes off the marble walls like thunder. Brigadier General William Patterson, who has been quietly observing from the back of the courtroom, approaches the defendant's table. His chest displays ribbons from 3 decades of military service, including multiple combat tours and special operations assignments. Staff Sergeant Coleman, General Patterson says, his voice carrying clearly through the now quiet courtroom. On behalf of the United States Army, I formally apologize for the injustice you have endured. Your silence in the face of false accusations demonstrates a level of honor and commitment that exemplifies the best traditions of military service. Coleman, still standing at attention, responds formally, "Thank you, sir. I was doing my duty. As I understood it?" General Patterson shakes his head. "Son, what you did went far beyond duty. You chose to accept disgrace rather than compromise operations that might save other soldiers' lives. That's not duty. That's heroism." The general turns to address the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, most of you will never know the details of what Staff Sergeant Coleman accomplished in Afghanistan. What I can tell you is that his actions represent the finest traditions of American military service. He completed impossible missions under conditions that would break most men, and he did it while bearing the additional burden of knowing that his sacrifices would never be publicly acknowledged." Colonel Rivera steps forward with another document. "Your Honor, there's one more matter. Staff Sergeant Coleman has been selected for immediate promotion to sergeant, first class, and assignment to the Special Operations Community. If he accepts, he will be joining one of the Army's most elite units." All eyes turn to Coleman, who has remained silent throughout these revelations. Finally, he speaks. "Your Honor, General Patterson, I am honored by this recognition, but I need you to understand something. The night of March 15th, 3 of my soldiers were severely wounded while I was completing my mission. Sergeant Tim Rodriguez will never walk normally again. Corporal Mike Santos has traumatic brain injury that affects his speech. Private First Class Jake Morrison has lost sight in his left eye." Coleman's voice grows stronger. "No classified mission, no matter how successful, changes the fact that I wasn't there when my brothers needed me. I accept responsibility for that, and I will carry that weight for the rest of my life." The courtroom is silent as Coleman continues. "That said, if the Army believes I can continue to serve effectively, I accept the promotion and the assignment. Not for recognition or career advancement, but because there might be other soldiers out there who need someone to take the missions that no one else will take." General Patterson nods with visible respect. "Sergeant First Class Coleman, your humility in the face of extraordinary service is exactly why you are selected for these missions in the first place. The Army needs soldiers who understand that with great capability comes great responsibility." As the formal proceedings conclude, the courtroom begins to empty slowly. Coleman is surrounded by his legal team, the special operations soldiers, and finally, his mother, who has waited 18 months to embrace her son without the shadow of disgrace hanging over them. Master Sergeant Wright, the retired ranger who had been bothered by something throughout the trial, approaches Coleman as he prepares to leave. "Son," Wright says, extending his hand, "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Something about your case never sat right with me. A real coward doesn't carry himself the way you do. A real coward doesn't choose prison over speaking in his own defense." Coleman shakes the older soldier's hand. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. That means more than you know." Wright smiles. "Take care of yourself, Sergeant First Class Coleman. And remember, the hardest missions are the ones where you have to trust that doing the right thing will eventually be recognized, even if it takes longer than you'd like. As Coleman walks down the courthouse steps, now flanked by his fellow special operations soldiers, the protesters who had called him a traitor just hours earlier, watch in confusion. Some have learned from news reports about the dramatic revelations in the courtroom. A few veterans in the crowd begin to applaud, understanding instinctively that they have witnessed something extraordinary. 6 months later, Coleman sits in a secure briefing room at Fort Bragg, receiving his next mission assignment. The details are classified, but the objective is clear. There's a situation developing in a remote corner of the world where conventional military operations aren't suitable. They need someone willing to operate alone, under deep cover, knowing that if things go wrong, official acknowledgement might never come. Coleman studies the mission parameters, noting the high probability of capture or death, the minimal support available, and the critical importance of the objective. It's exactly the kind of mission he's been trained for, the kind that most soldiers would never volunteer for. "Sir," Coleman tells his commanding officer, "when do I leave?" The officer, a colonel who has read Coleman's full service record, shakes his head with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Coleman, you know this mission has less than a 40% success probability. You know that if you're captured, we might not be able to acknowledge your existence. You know that even if you succeed, you might never receive recognition. Why? Do you keep taking these assignments?" Coleman considers the question, thinking of Rodriguez's struggle to walk, Santos's difficulty with speech, Morrison's lost vision. He thinks of the families of soldiers who came home because intelligence gathered from his missions prevented attacks. He thinks of the protesters who called him a coward and the jury that found him guilty, and he realizes none of it matters compared to the mission. "Sir," Coleman says quietly, because someone has to. The colonel nods, understanding that he's looking at the type of soldier that every army needs, but few armies deserve. "Godspeed, Sergeant First Class Coleman. Bring yourself home." As Coleman leaves the briefing room to begin preparation for another impossible mission, he passes a bulletin board displaying photos of recent Medal of Honor recipients. For just a moment, he wonders what it would be like to have his achievements publicly recognized, to have his family know exactly what he's accomplished in service to his country. Then he pushes the thought aside. Recognition isn't why he serves. He serves because somewhere out there, soldiers like Rodriguez, Santos, and Morrison are counting on people like him to take the missions that no one else will take, to carry the burdens that no one else will carry, to make the sacrifices that no one else will make. And that, Coleman knows, is recognition enough. This story reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, often disguised as ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. The quiet taxi driver, the unassuming mechanic, the reserved librarian, any of them, could be carrying incredible stories and extraordinary skills. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be completely different from who you thought they were? Share your story in the comments below. If this story gave you chills or made you think twice about judging people by their appearances, smash that like button and subscribe to the Hidden Stories for more incredible tales of hidden heroes, secret identities, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. And remember, never underestimate the person sitting next to you. They might just be the hero the world needs. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.